I think really for me the challenge of history is to have people not only understand and use what they know and the place they come from. You really need to meet students where they come from. And then the challenge is to help them see things from a different point of view. When students take a class of mine, I want them to come away with a certain set of skills. I want them to be able to go to the library and find things out. I want them to be able to frame a question. I want them to be able to look at a picture or read a document and think about it in context. I think they can almost never have too much context. And I think the more rich materials from the past they encounter, the more they see that 5 people could have experienced the same event and come away with completely different conclusions, completely different experiences, then the more they're able to think like a historian and think in a complex way. There are 2 images in chapter 18 of American missionaries in Japan and China. One of the pictures suggests that Christian missionaries really often abetted the work of Western imperialism. And there's a document by a Japanese Buddhist named Kinzo Harai who critiques U.S. Christian missions in Japan. But then the students who really dislike evangelical Christianity, there's another picture of Christian missionaries founding a college for women in China. And the caption tells them about how much missionaries helped foster women's education and how missionary schools were very popular and how they really fostered support for more widespread democratic education, particularly for women. So however you feel about missionaries when you come in, you have to think in a more complicated way about both the positive and the negative legacies of that kind of work. I particularly like political maps. Politics is very regional in the United States, and so maps of presidential elections, maps of where the Populist Party was strong. For example, the map of women's suffrage. Almost all the states west of the Mississippi had full women's voting rights well before 1920. And there was only one state of the former Confederacy that ratified that amendment to the Constitution. So the West started the women's suffrage movement, the Northeast finally signed on, and the South never signed on. It was just passed without the South's it was really passed without the South's agreement. So if you look at a map, you could think about not women's suffrage as something that the United States adopted in 1920, but as something that happened over a long period of time and on a very sharply regional basis. I've really enjoyed working with the other authors. It's been a very, very creative process. James and I worked together on a new Part 4, which focuses on 3 wars of national expansion and consolidation. The Civil War, of course, still remains critically important, but we've placed the Civil War in the context of 2 other wars of national consolidation. The first of those is the War of Conquest against Native peoples, and the second is the Mexican War. And so we've really taken those 3 wars together and said, look, in 1844, the United States was this sort of modest assemblage of eastern states, and some of those states claimed the right to secede. They hadn't really completely agreed to be part of the nation. And by the time of Reconstruction, you have a continental nation that has secure power over the South and the West and is really poised to become a world industrial power. Part 5, which is really the part of the book maybe I'm most excited about, is I think the first textbook on the U.S. market to think about the late 19th century as part of a long progressive era. We've really taken some of the latest scholarship and argued that the origins of modern America emerged very much out of the Civil War and Reconstruction, and we tell the story of a long progressive era that's full of very dynamic reform movements and efforts at state building and cultural and economic modernization. I think the late 19th century is the great underdog era of American history, where you begin to see modern America emerge. One of the reasons I came to this textbook was because I wrote a synthesis of this period called New Spirits that was an attempt to just rethink the late 19th century. And I found that project really exciting, and so I really wanted to take that into a U.S. history textbook and say, look, we can think about this era as the starting point for modern America.